Batman Dark Patterns has some of the most horrifying Batman stories that I've ever read. It's a 12-issue maxi series, and each storyline is 3 issues long. The one that we're covering here is called We Are the Wounded. So what this does is this opens up with Batman's monologue. And what he says is, at Central Station, 3 are apprehended on the tracks, playing chicken with the oncoming A train. The eldest of them is 12 years old, and tomorrow night, they'll do it again. 24 Gotham children have died playing this game in the decades since the Metro was built. He says in the streets of the Bowery, 6 dogs have been re-released. They were retrieved from the pounds by locals who claimed them as their pets. They are vicious, wild dogs who roam like wolves, killing cats and terrorizing pensioners. But the Bowery has always had wild dogs, and the people of the city fear seeing it changing around them. And so he says, a building burns in Cherry Hill. At least this one was already abandoned. An insurance fraud, or just more kids. 3 years of stalking her streets at night have taught me that there are heinous things in Gotham that I can do nothing about. I cannot save people from themselves. Instead, I grip my teeth against the pitch-black tumult of her chaos and wait for a light to cut through the dark. And so at that point, Batman responds to a case in Gotham. And you kind of get this interesting statement that's made, right? Where it says, well, Lieutenant Gordon, I can tell you it definitely hurt. The killer pinpointed every major nerve cluster in the body without spilling a drop of blood, keeping him alive as he played his body as an orchestra of agony. And that's where Gordon just says, we need something new, right? Anything to tie this victim to the previous 2. And it's this guy who's sitting in a chair with needles sticking out of his body. The dude looks like Pinhead. He looks like Hellraiser. It is horrifying. And Batman just asks, right, who is this? And that's where you end up realizing that alongside Commissioner Gordon is a guy by the name of Dr. Sirica, that apparently he's a forensic pathologist and that he just opened a lab at Gotham University. And so when he starts talking to Batman, he's a little creepy. He says corpses tell a story. The wear and tear of a life, bone fractures, wound patterns. And he says, from what I read of your lifestyle, I hope that I won't see you on a slab anytime soon. But Batman's kind of tuning him out. I mean, he's listening to him, but not hyper-focusing on him. Instead, he's just kind of analyzing this entire case. And so he just says, from the state of the apartment, he is like the other 2, single, living alone. But Jim Gordon says, other than that, they couldn't be more different. Francis Oakley was a high-flying lawyer until 2 nights ago. Kenneth Armitage was retired, living in near poverty until our perp got a hold of him last night. And that's where Sirica says it would appear that Mr. Choi here fell somewhere in between. But the way the doctor looks at all this, he's almost kind of admiring it, right? He says, it's magnificent work, you know. And that's where Bruce Wayne is just like, he removes their tongues and teeth first so they couldn't scream. And the doctor responds. He says, whoever your killer is, he's had plenty of medical training. And I mean that from a professional perspective, the cleanness of it all. And so Batman just brings Gordon outside and he just says, I don't trust the guy. And even Jim Gordon recognizes this, but he's like, you know, he's really good at what he does. And Batman says the drooling and the way his eyes dart around the room, consistent with abuse of formaldehyde. And so that's where Gordon is just like, you really think this guy's getting high on embalming fluid? And he just tells Bruce, he's like, look, man, here's the rub, right? Gotham's last coroner quit over a year ago when the Joker sent him a bouquet of flowers with a "to my favorite collaborator" card. And he just says, right, Dr. Sirica's family are from old Gotham, going back generations. Even if he did leave Florida under slightly unclear conditions, he's what we've got, and we're lucky to even have anything at all. And so where Bruce Wayne goes to take off, Gordon asks him, like, where are you going? And Batman just says, 3 bodies, enough to make a pattern. There will be something to find, something to lead me to the next target before the killer. And so he kind of jumps back into his monologue again, right, and sort of catches us up on everything that's going on. He says, the majority of serial killers know their first victim. That makes Oakley, the lawyer tortured to death at his desk 2 nights ago, the key to all of this. His office has refused to make his private files available to the Gotham City Police Department, citing sensitive material. materials, so I retrieve them myself. And that's when security guards show up. And what's kind of wild about this is Batman doesn't really consider them much of a threat at all, but they keep coming. It's not just a security guard or two security guards walking through the building. It's a full-on security detail. And he even asks the question, right, who pays for this much security to protect a lawyer after they're dead, right? So clearly there's something going on. They're not here to protect the lawyer. Obviously, he's a corpse. There's nothing to protect. They're here to protect secrets. And in fact, one of the guys fires off at Batman with a submachine gun, and of course they hit him, but not enough to really kill him. And so ultimately he escapes when he's cornered by a handful of them. And so he's just like, all right, there's something much bigger going on here. And so once he gets back to the Batcave, while Alfred's working on him, he just says, right, they're all in here, Alfred. Francis Oakley had recently been taking on pro bono cases that he basically became an altruistic lawyer. But Bruce Wayne comments, right, he says, before all of that, it's all corporate clients. Ace Chemicals, the Iceberg Lounge, even a few LexCorp subsidiaries. And so he says, the man who died tonight was prosecuted a few years ago, accused in the deaths of his elderly parents, and quickly cleared with Oakley's help. And so where Alfred asks, okay, like, is it possible these are revenge killings? Batman says no, right? He's like, Choi didn't do it. The wiring in the carbon monoxide alarm was basically faulty. And he says the man that died last night lost a lawsuit against the city after a bridge collapsed while his wife drove his daughter's home across it. Oakley represented the city. So Oakley's kind of the link to it all, seemingly. And Bruce says, one a night, men who lost their families, who were left alone in the world by tragedies. And he says, there's a half dozen more men in these files who meet the same criteria. And so that's where Alfred asks if this guy, whoever this killer is going after the people that are basically on this list, how do you know who's coming next? And Bruce just says, Armitage and Choi. He's working through them alphabetically. So it's not that difficult to figure out who's going to be the next target. And right off the bat, it solidifies the fact that this is not some grand, crazy scheme. It's not like a Riddler type situation where the locations of the victims somehow spell out like a mathematical proof or something like that. And so Gordon asks the most logical question, who's on the list for tomorrow night? And so Bruce picks back up with this monologue. He says the signal has been lit since sundown. No doubt Gordon wants to know exactly what I thought I was doing at the law office last night, but I cannot leave my post. He says Michael Gallo was a petty thief, or he was until a year ago when he made the mistake of robbing the home of a made man affiliated with the Falcones. No police report was filed, of course. The crime families conduct their own investigations. A week later, Gallo's wife was found floating in Gotham Bay. He got the message and has been working as a janitor ever since. He refused to get involved in a class action case built against the Falcones. I bugged his apartment while he was at work. Inside felt like a shrine to the dead woman. He's been sobbing since he returned home an hour ago. But now there's footsteps. And so there's essentially this twisted, sadistic sounding voice that just says, Mr. Gallo, it is so lonely, isn't it? And where Gallo's freaking out because he has no clue who this guy is, the voice says, every night you cry and the wounds never close. The gaping holes they leave behind. I can give you what I could never have, what they took away from me. And he says, they took it from me, but you can have so very much of it. And Batman just comes jumping in, right? Literally flying through the window. He's there early enough to save Michael Gallo, but what he sees is a man whose entire upper body is covered in nails and spikes. And what makes this so crazy is that it actually presents this massive challenge for Batman, because he says he's no fighter. His stance is non-existent, his hands low. I aim for his solar plexus to shut this down before it even starts. And then I realize those are nails that I'm about to drive through his throat. And if I strike his chest, the spikes in his flesh are in danger of rupturing his heart or lungs. Even those in his arms and legs are purposefully adjacent to the major arteries. His flesh is a tapestry of near-fatal self-mutilation. I cannot hit him without killing him, but he can hit me. And what this guy does is he demonstrates insane levels of strength. I mean, just almost overwhelming. And Batman says, right, he shouldn't be this strong. He should be in agony. It's like he doesn't feel it. And then Batman realizes that's exactly it. He doesn't feel anything. He doesn't feel pain. And he says, I need to use the belt. There has to be something, some way to stop him from hitting me. And he says, but apparently Gallo has been prepared in case the Falcones ever came back for him. Because this guy fires off a shotgun. He doesn't kill this mystery murder man, but he does send the guy fleeing away. And then once Batman starts to recover, because he was trying to find some way to overcome this killer, but now the guy's fled, he's of course kind of pissed off at Gallo. But Gallo asks him, right, like, what in the hell did that thing want? And Batman just tells him to torture you to death. That's really all he wanted. And so at that point, you pick back up in Wayne Manor, and he starts going through and analyzing these old books that belong to his dad. Because Alfred asks him, right, what are you looking for? And Bruce just says, it's somewhere in one of these, my father's old medical books. He says, if I remember right, it first appeared in medieval manuscripts going back to the 14th century. It was intended as a map of pain, a portrait of every agony that could be inflicted on the human body. And where Alfred kind of hears this and is like, that sounds horrifying, right? The response of Bruce, it was not meant for harm. It was intended as an index to cure people of their suffering. And that's where he pinpoints what he's looking for. He says, this is what attacked me tonight, the wound man, that he thinks he's healing his victims in some way. And tomorrow night, he will kill again. And so, of course, at that point, it's figuring out the mystery, right? Like, who in the world is this wound man? And so there comes a point where Batman ends up meeting with Commissioner Gordon. Now, there is a bit of an argument between the two of them about whether or not Dr. Sirica is capable enough to be able to at least figure out the killer's identity based on, wound patterns and things like that and the people that he's killed. But at the end of the day, there is information provided to Bruce by Gordon that Bruce was asking for. And what Batman is told is that the private security that he demolished at the Smith & Oakley law firm were being paid for by Ace Chemicals, and that Smith & Oakley had represented them in a number of suits over decades. That from where Jim Gordon's standing, they were just protecting their assets. But for Batman, it's like they're most likely covering something up. And so at that point, he goes on the hunt by following the list to monitor the guy who's going to be attacked next. And he says the wound man's first victim, the lawyer, Francis Oakley, helped convict Randall Jones for assault after Jones strangled a coworker at his stock exchange's Christmas party. The woman survived, but Jones's wife and daughters, understandably, were not waiting for him when he was released from Blackgate Penitentiary. Jones lives alone, wearing a groove in the tarmac between his apartment and this bar across the street. He's next on the list the wound man took from Oakley's office. He's the first one who would possibly deserve it. And so, of course, Batman shows up when the wound man is there. Technically, he shows up beforehand. And so when the wound man shows up, Batman just kind of tells him, like, you think you're healing people. I understand what it is that you're trying to do. But the reality is, you're not. This is over. And he says, you know as well as I do that you could die if I hit you. So do not make me hurt you. And that's where the response of the wound man is, no, please, absolutely hurt me. Make me feel pain. And so what Batman does is he actually takes out a kind of knockout substance and sprays the wound man in the face, right? Basically knocking him unconscious. So this guy is, at his core, human. The problem is that Batman can't just let him die. One, because Batman doesn't really kill people if he can avoid it. And two, because this guy has information that Batman needs. And so Batman takes this guy out of the building, throws him in the Batmobile in order to get him to Gotham General, only to find out that Gotham General is currently on fire. And so, of course, he can't take this guy there because they won't be able to tend to him as soon as he needs to be attended to. And so he ends up taking him directly to Dr. Sirica and just says, look, I get that you're a guy that works on corpses, but at the end of the day, a doctor's a doctor. You need to save this man. And so Batman drops him off and then tells him, get a hold of Commissioner Gordon, tell him what happened here. I have to go out and continue this investigation to figure out who it was that made him. And so at that point, Batman goes to find a guy named Nicky Harris. And so it turns out that Nicky Harris was a guy who worked for the Gotham Gazette, but was ultimately fired from his job, simply because of the fact that he was basically digging up dirt. Specifically, he tried to do an expose on Ace Chemicals, and Ace Chemicals put their lawyers to work and cost this guy his job. So now he's just working for some third-rate tabloid, putting out stories about how Batman is a vampire from Eastern Europe or something crazy like that. But at the end of the day, despite the fact that he's not really a respectable reporter anymore, Nicky Harris still has valuable information. And that's why he tells Batman, you've realized that they're very good at scrubbing their prints from any kind of public record. Otherwise, you'd be talking to the cops instead of me. There's a lot of skeletons in those vanished closets. Are there any particular bones that you are looking for? And Batman just says, anesthetics or nerve agents. And so that's where Nicky basically hands him a file. And he says, nothing you'll find in any modern database, though I'm guessing that you've checked. And it's always harder to scrub old paper files, particularly ones that have already fallen into unauthorized hands. And so as Batman's scrolling through it, he comes across something called cryoxin. And that's where Nicky says it's a liquid inhibitor they were developing on a government contract, one that disappeared from all records without a trace a decade and a half ago. That document is the only evidence I found that it ever existed. And so Batman starts to put the pieces together, right? That something went wrong and they made a monster. And the response of Nicky, maybe it was just something so nasty that it violated the Geneva Conventions. And that can even spook Uncle Sam from time to time. And so Batman asks, right, what happened to the chemical itself? And Nicky just says, no one knows, but I might have a theory. And he asks, have you ever heard of the town without screams? Which sounds like the most horrifying place that you could possibly imagine. And so at that point, you jump back over to Dr. Sarika, and he just kind of sits down and talks to this guy. And he says, Batman asked me to notify the police that you were here, but you're a doctor, aren't you? It's apparent from the wounds that you inflict on yourself and that you inflict on the people you kill. And so I figured, what if I took the opportunity to speak to you first, doctor to doctor? And he says, I would love to understand you. And so he asks, what you've done to yourself, it's remarkable. My guess, it was an attempt to channel the pain you can no longer feel. The suffering building up inside of you needed an outlet, but it did not work. And he says, there's a reason they say doctors make the worst patients. We like to think that we're always objective, even when it comes to ourselves. But that's not the truth. When we're suffering, instinct takes over, just like everyone else. We panic. We want it to stop. We lunge after solving the symptoms, grasp at anything we think might help. We forget that to cure, we need to get to the root cause of the malady. Now, this on the surface just kind of sounds like the ravings of a madman to a degree, but the reality here is it's incredibly important because at that moment, the wound man starts to realize there is one particular person that he needs to go after. He's been doing this the wrong way the entire time. And so following that, you jump to Commissioner Gordon for a second, simply him going to meet with the mayor, given the murders that have taken place as high profile as they are, and the fact that at the very least they have the wound man in some measure of custody, only for Gordon to be introduced to a man named Christopher Sionis, the CEO and senior partner at Axis Corp. And he says, you may have heard of some of the subsidiaries that we operate in Gotham, Janus Cosmetics, and Jim Gordon finishes the statement, right? Ace Chemicals. And that's where Sionis is like, so you've heard of us. And so at that point, Batman picks up in the town without screams. And again, this is creepy because he says, upstate Gotham, insulated from the sickness of the city by the miles of road, I find little cause to visit here often, a place where good living and moderate wealth are taken for granted, where suburban happiness is promised and purportedly found, but not here, it would seem, not in the planned community of Greenfields, which last year the tabloids dubbed the town without screams. A few page 8 stories of abnormalities which were refuted and died on the vine. A few calls for help which went ignored. Now the people of Gotham call for superstitions to save them because no one else has. And so while Batman is investigating the town without screams, basically some henchmen from Ace Chemicals break into Dr. Sarika's lab, they attack him, and then they take the wound man. And so at that moment, you jump back to the first killing that took place, the murder of Francis Oakley. And he's just kind of like tied down into this chair with all these just needles and nails sticking out of his body. And he just says, right, please, right, it hurts, just make the pain stop. And that's where the wound man says, describe it, right? I can barely remember what it feels like thanks to you. And Oakley says, I'm just the lawyer, right? I was just doing what I was supposed to do. And the response of the wound man, yes, with your cease and desist, gag orders, injunctions, and intimidations, you contained what they did to us. You let it happen. I thought what pain you must be in, what sickness you must have in your soul to sleep at night. And I thought perhaps I could purge it from you. I cannot purge it from myself anymore. And Oakley asks him, right, like, do you really feel like you're the only one to have ever suffered? Every file in those cabinets right there, every case is a catalog of human misery and misfortune. And it's not my fault. I do not deserve this. Everyone suffers. It's the human condition. And so the wound man just says, yes, right, you are correct in that. And I can help them too. Now hold still. I'm a doctor. And just like stabs him in the eye with a needle. It is so unsettling and it's so crazy because then you pick back up with Batman and he says Francis Oakley was his first victim, and from his files it's easy to see why. Dr. Jessup Hartnell had been reaching out to everyone he could, the city, law firms, old colleagues, other doctors, medical centers. Oakley blocked him at every turn. He did so on behalf of his clients. The people who had poisoned Hartnell had poisoned this entire town, who drove him to become a monster. And so at that point, he chimes into Gordon, and he just kind of fills Gordon in on everything he found. He says, decades ago, Ace Chemicals bought an acre of land upstate. They used it to dump chemical waste, cryoxin, an experimental nerve agent. They then sold the land to the Gotham City Council for cheap. The council built a town here, Greenfields, a suburban paradise, except the cryoxin never went away. It's in the drinking water, the swimming pools, leaking out of the ground, poisoning everyone here. And so while the connection is fairly poor, Batman's able to pick up a couple statements from Gordon. Wound man taken, it was Ace. I'm certain of it. And so at that point, Batman goes out to the Batmobile only to be confronted by a handful of people in this town who actually intend him harm. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. They're not henchmen, right? They're not working on behalf of Ace Chemical. They're actually just people who were scared, because from their perspective, the issue is this. If Batman reveals all this information to the world and tells everyone what's going on, that they're going to make these people leave, or worse, experiment on them. Now, making them leave may not necessarily seem like the most horrific thing, but what they tell him is like, we came from places like the Narrows, and even one of the guys says, I had to pick up my kid's stroller and carry it over basically junkies' bodies while they were collapsed on the floor in order to get us onto the elevator so we could get up to our apartment. We do not want to go back there. And the reality here is that, as crazy as all this is, we've basically found a way to make it work. And so where Batman really kind of makes it clear that he's taking this information, he's leaving, and he's going to hold Ace Chemical accountable, they attack him. Now, here's the crazy thing about it, right? He says, human brains have natural fail-safes. They stop us from using the full capability of the body, from pushing our muscles to the point that they can shatter our bones. In extreme circumstances, these fail-safes can be overridden. It's what allows a distraught mother to lift a car off their child after an accident. The cryoxin in their systems is overriding these same fail-safes for the people of Greenfields. They don't know how to fight, and it doesn't matter. I don't even think they intend to kill me, but they don't know when to stop. They cannot feel it, the damage that they're doing, but I can, right up until I can't. And when I come to, everything's changed, because one of the citizens in the town basically talks everybody down. Like, you're a kindergarten teacher, Paul. Like, what are you doing? And so that's where she fills him in on basically everything that had gone on with Hartnell, the wound man, because Batman didn't really know this guy's story. He didn't understand why the wound man had inflicted so much self-harm and then started going after and attacking people. And in fact, from her perspective, Hartnell had gone into the city for the purpose of trying to find some kind of help. And Batman says he's killed 3 people, right? And so the woman's like, why? And Batman just tells her, pain is our warning system. It's what tells us when we've gone too far. And he says, you mentioned that he had a wife. what happened to his wife? And so at that point, you switch back over to the Wound Man when Batman's traveling back to Gotham, when the Wound Man is being held by Ace Chemical, specifically by Christopher Sionis. And they tell him, right, like, I mean, all these studs and spikes that you have in your body, honestly, you're making it pretty easy for us because our goal here is to basically just get rid of you. I mean, the reality here is that you're kind of ruffling a lot of feathers and you're drawing a lot of attention to something that we would otherwise just not have any attention drawn to. Now, the cool thing here is that we don't really have to torture you. We don't have to shoot you. With all these nails and spikes, all we have to do is just pull one out and you just bleed to death. And that's the end of that. No one's really going to ask any questions. It'll all go under the rug and that'll be the end of that, which is exactly what they do, right? He pulls one of the pieces of rebar out of this guy. And at that point, the Wound Man just says, Christopher Sionis, you are the root cause of the malady, and just breaks himself free because Sionis didn't really know what he was dealing with and the enhanced strength that Hartnell had. And so where the henchmen of Sionis start firing at this guy, he goes racing off into a corner, kills the lights, and then just says, I'm afraid that this is going to hurt. And so at that point, Batman picks up on where Hartnell had been taken by Sionis and his guys, and Batman shows up there, only to find that Hartnell, right, the Wound Man's just kind of laying there, bleeding out, and Batman says, right, you've lost a lot of blood. And Hartnell just says, the root cause, I almost cured it. And then Sionis just kind of shows up out of nowhere, and it's just like, you're the Batman, right? Thank God you're here. He broke in here, tried to tie me up and kill me. Lucky my security, rest their souls, were able to rescue me in time. And in our struggle, one of those spikes in him came loose. I locked myself upstairs until I heard your voice, and I just waited him out. And Batman just says, that's not what happened at all. And Sionis is like, sure it is. And everybody will believe me. That's 5 people that he's killed. Who do you think is going to believe him? And Batman just stands up in realizing the truth of this, right? Batman stands up and just says, did you know about his wife? And Sionis is just like, who was his wife? And Batman says her name was Amber. Hartnell was working late, reaching out to whoever he could, trying to get the word out about Greenfields. She fell asleep in front of the TV. They didn't feel the cold anymore, but she had the fireplace blazing. It was just a habit. And Amber escaped the grate and landed on the rug. She wouldn't have felt the heat either. She wouldn't have felt it as the flames reached her skin. She probably slept through the fat in her body beginning to melt. The cartilage boiling in her bones, cracking them. And then he came home and tried desperately to make himself feel something, anything. That's what Ace did to him, what you did to him. And the response to Sionis, as defiant as he is, there's no proof of any of that. And soon enough, this will all be forgotten by everybody. And he says terrible things happen in Gotham every day. And the truth is, no one wants to know about it, the unpleasantries. And so they just don't. They just ignore it. Besides, what are you going to do? And Batman just tells him, the shoulder is a very complex body part. It contains the brachial plexus, a network of nerves that connects the arm to the neck and spine. It's why even minor shoulder injuries do not always heal. And he just presses it in and just inflicts horrific pain on this guy. And ultimately just says, Gordon, I'm sending you an address, 2 assailants, KIA, 2 ambulances needed for the survivors. And he just says, there is another fire in Gotham tonight. It burns in the shoulder of Christopher Sionis, and it will burn for the rest of his long, prolonged life. And with every twinge, he will remember why. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. It's a phenomenal story. And there's like 3 more story arcs that are in this whole Batman Dark Patterns thing. It's incredible. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.